What we're about to talk about is not a debate having to do with immigration. What's going on here is policy acting as cover for moral collapse. On the very same day that Donald shut the door to tens of thousands of Afghans fleeing the Taliban, many of those Afghans risked their lives working for United States forces. He decided to roll out the red carpet for 59 white South Africans. This is not a coincidence. This is a clear message.
So what makes these Afrikaners different from other refugees from war-torn countries like Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, or Afghanistan, who have been waiting for years to get into the country?
We know that the Trump administration suspended the refugee settlement program, saying that essentially we didn't have space for this. I want to read to you part of what their reasoning was at the time. They said the United States lacks the ability to absorb large numbers of migrants, and in particular refugees, into its communities. They went on to say that this really ensures the appropriate assimilation of refugees. But I've been talking to folks and they say really this is about race, they think, especially some South Africans who fled after the apartheid and the racist regime there. I talked to some people who told me that they feel like this is the president essentially taking the side of people who are white over black refugees, including in places like Sudan and the Congo.
We don't have to speculate. We're being told. This will make assimilation easier. What does that mean? What has the goal been? What has been the goal set, I should say, for immigrants to this country from time immemorial? Assimilate. Assimilate. Okay, now, in some ways, that meant shedding your culture, your heritage, your language. My grandfather grew up speaking German. My grandmother grew up in Scotland. Her first language was Gaelic. Neither one of those languages was spoken in their house. None of their children learned either one of their native languages. Okay, that's how white people assimilated. How do people of color in this country assimilate? Well, guess what? They don't. And that is exactly the point here. We cannot let, says the Trump regime, any actual refugees into this country if they can't meet our standards for assimilation, which obviously is the color of your skin. Now, Donald is going around calling these white South Africans refugees. They're Afrikaners, by the way, but they aren't fleeing war. They are not fleeing political persecution. They're not being hunted down by their governments. They didn't even ask to come here because they're really not fleeing anything. Most Afrikaners didn't even want this because they know that it's vile, in addition to being insulting and stupid. That's one of the things that makes it so grotesque. He's not responding to a crisis. He's ignoring a lot of crises, those being faced by actual refugees, but he's fabricating a crisis in order to justify his racial preferences on immigration policies. And you know what? I do think it is fair to point out that those 59 Afrikaners who did accept the invitation to come here, they actually are fleeing something. They are fleeing their right to be racist scum. And we're going to welcome them here so they can do just that. They're going to fit right in with the Trump regime, that's for sure. So let's start with the obvious. While Donald fast-tracked the white Afrikaners under the guise of quote-unquote humanitarian aid, he will simultaneously stripping protection from over 9,000 Afghans. Again, many of these supported us in the war against the Taliban. They were our allies. They were our translators. They were military support personnel, and they were promised protection. Yesterday, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, notorious puppy murderer, claimed that conditions in Afghanistan had improved even as Taliban repression continues and our former Afghan allies received deportation notices. Now, I want to compare that egregious falsehood with what Donald said about the Afrikaners, to whom he is granting asylum for some reason.
Who claim discrimination in their home country are heading to the United States. Right. Your administration is going to welcome them. as refugees. Now, this comes as you've halted virtually all refugee admissions for people fleeing famine and war from countries like Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Why are you creating an expedited path into the country for Afrikaners but not others?
Because they're being killed, and we don't want to see people be killed. But it's a genocide that's taking place that you people don't want to write about. But it's a terrible thing that's taking place, and farmers are being killed. They happen to be white.
No white South Africans are being killed. This is a myth. There's no genocide going on there. The genocide was the one committed by white South Africans under apartheid rule. Now, Elon Musk, the guy who still seems to have Donald's ear, because remember, that is all it takes to get Donald to believe whatever you want him to believe. Well, that and a lot of fucking money. Musk grew up in apartheid era South Africa, and he really, 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 really misses the institutionalized racism. He himself has been pushing this false white genocide claims for years. And now under the Trump regime, those conspiracy theories have become rationale for actual policy. South Africa's president, of course, called this a completely false narrative. Here's President Ramaphosa in his own words at the Africa CEO Forum.
We've raised our own concern because those people who are being enticed to go to the United States do not fit the definition of a refugee. A refugee is someone who has to leave their country out of fear of political persecution, religious persecution. They don't fit that bill. They don't fit that description. And I had a conversation with President Trump on the phone, and he said, what's happening down there? And I said, President, what you've been told by those people who are opposed to transformation back home in South Africa is not true. And I added to him, I said, we were well taught by Nelson Mandela and other iconic leaders like Oliver Tambo on how to continue to build a united nation out of the diverse groupings that we have in South Africa. We're the only country on the continent where the colonizers came to stay, and we have never driven them out of our country. So they are staying, and they're making great progress. It's a fringe grouping that does not have a lot of support, that is anti-transformation and anti-change, that would actually prefer to see South Africa going back to apartheid type of policies.
Exactly. The people who are pro-apartheid are the people Donald is welcoming to this country based on a completely false and dangerous premise. Basically, what Donald is saying is that not only does he know better than the president of South Africa about what's going on in his country, he apparently knows better than Nelson Mandela. Genocide Watch says that white South Africans are statistically less likely to be murdered than their black neighbors, and human rights groups across South Africa, many led by white clergy, have said that the claim of white genocide is an outright lie. So let's be very clear about it. This was not about white South Africans being in any kind of danger. It was about race and the enduring racism of white South Africans like Elon Musk, and obviously the virulent racism of people like Donald Trump. The Trump regime isn't even bothering to pretend otherwise. While staging a press event to welcome the arriving Afrikaners at Dulles Airport, Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau was asked why this group was allowed to skip past the very barriers the Trump regime has imposed on nearly every other refugee population. And this was his response.
There are many people who fit the criteria of seeking help, who are fleeing persecution. Afghans, for example, they live in a country run by the Taliban. But they're being denied refugee status. So I'm wondering, why has such an exception been made for the Afrikaners, especially when the South African government says they're not in danger? And are you going to open up the refugee settlement program for others?
Thank you for that question. I think you may recall that on the president's first day in office, on January 20th of this year, he issued an executive order that paused U.S. refugee programs that had been going at record levels under the prior administration and had brought in people that we were not sure had been carefully vetted for national security issues, and put a pause on the refugee admission program in general. That pause, of course, was subject from the very beginning to exceptions where it was determined that this would be in the interest of the United States. Some of the criteria are making sure that refugees did not pose any challenge to our national security and that they could be assimilated easily into our country.
There's that word again, assimilated. Yes, thank you for that question. It lets me demonstrate what a horrific racist scumbag I am. Yeah, well, good to know. Good to know. Because as I said earlier, we know what assimilation means in America. It's not just South Africa's government that's calling out Donald's racist immigration policies. The Trump regime just received massive blowback on the home front. One of the strongest rebukes came from the Episcopal Church. For nearly 40 years, they've partnered with the United States government to resettle refugees. Until now. Here's Bishop Sean Rowe speaking with ABC on what pushed this change.
The Episcopal Church was ordered by the government to help resettle the Afrikaners, but today the church terminated its relationship with the federal government, citing a moral opposition to resettling the white Afrikaners. Joining us now is the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, Bishop Sean Rowe. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Of course, this was a 4 decades old relationship across many administrations that was ended abruptly today. Why did the classification of these immigrants as refugees cross a moral line?
Well, the reality is we can't be ourselves in the Episcopal Church and take the step of resettling white Afrikaners from South Africa. Our church has a long commitment to racial justice and reconciliation, and we have historic ties with the Anglican Church of South Africa. Desmond Tutu is a part of been a partner was a partner in this work for us. So we're just not able to take this step. It's not in line with anything that we're about. And it also saddens us to see that other refugees who are being denied entrance to the United States are people, brave people who've worked alongside of our military in Iraq and Afghanistan, now face danger, have been in camps for a long time and aren't being allowed in. And so this is just, the program no longer aligns with where we are as a church and what we're about.
Now, the Episcopal Church did not just opt out of the Afrikaner program. They've ended their entire partnership with the federal government, which to me is telling. That is the scale of the moral disgust we're talking about. This is the faith community that helped resettle Vietnamese refugees fleeing Saigon to escape persecution in the 70s, Sudanese survivors, Syrian families fleeing ISIS. And Donald is asking them to become complicit in his white nationalist fantasy. Instead, they chose their values, which is great. Let's have more of that. It would be wonderful if other faith groups followed suit here. It would be amazing if the Republicans in power actually woke up and realized that this is a bridge too far. This is a line that we should never cross. I'm not holding my breath there, of course. The Episcopal Church is not alone in their refusal to play along, though. Actual Afrikaners are also speaking out as well. Before we continue, I just want to remind you that we here at Mary Trump Media are not corporate media. We do not bend the knee. We're not for sale, and we never will be. We expose the lies the Trump regime tells every day and wants to bury. Independent media survives because of you. So please like and share our videos, and if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. Okay, now let's get back to the resistance the Trump regime is facing. Here's a kicker. Many Afrikaners are rejecting Donald's offer outright. One farmer, Maritz Grobler, told the Wall Street Journal, quote, "This is my country," unquote. He's a 9th generation South African who owns over 1,000 acres of farmland. He's not fleeing. He's not in danger. And he says that Donald's narrative of persecution is wrong. Now, it's one thing to lie to the American people because he's so good at it. But it's another thing to lie so blatantly that the people you claim to be rescuing are actually saying, no, thank you, we're fine, you're lying. Many Afrikaners are taking to social media to sound the alarm on just exactly who it is that the Trump regime is welcoming into this country and why they won't be joining them.
Today you will be welcoming the so-called white Afrikaans refugees. They are there based on an offer made to them, which I must say was informed by disinformation about South Africa. You are not getting successful, professional, white, middle-class South Africans that are fleeing South Africa. The people you are getting are the people that believe that there is discrimination against them based on their race. Keep in mind, we live in the most unequal country in the world. 70% of agricultural land and agricultural holdings are owned by white South Africans. There is a huge salary disparity between white South Africans and the rest of the population. And there are a number of other indicators which shows you that this story of discrimination based on race is false.
Now, I'm pretty sure that the white South Africans who are fleeing are, to the extent that they are discriminated against, it's not because they're white, it's because they're horrible. Anyway, many of them, based on what we just heard, are better off than most other South Africans, read Black South Africans. And these Afrikaners arrived this week with their matching luggage in their first-class seats, talking on their iPhones. This was not an escape. This was a favor being done to them by Elon Musk in exchange for a culture war talking point. Donald is not solving a problem. He's doing what he often does. He has a solution in mind, and he's creating a problem so he can put that solution into effect. But obviously, what he's really doing is distracting from the real violence the Trump regime is committing against refugees. And make no mistake, that's exactly what's happening. By denying entry to this country to people who are desperately in need of a safe harbor is to commit violence against them. There are people who are in real danger from their governments. They are fleeing war. They are fleeing hunger. They are fleeing disease. They need somewhere to go that will shelter them. Up until very recently, the United States has been that country. So, luckily, this latest move of Donald's and Elon Musk is not going to go unchallenged. The Episcopal Church said no. Most Afrikaners are saying no. And we need to keep saying no. Because to base refugee status upon the color of one's skin is obscene. And it has to stop. Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.